Welcome to this GOMA Talk. My name is Daniel Browning. I'm the producer and presenter of Radio National's Awaye program. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respect to the Jagera and the Turrbal peoples of Greater Brisbane, and I thank them for their custodianship of this beautiful country. It's my great pleasure to be here tonight to host the first of these GOMA Talks events in conjunction with the extraordinary exhibition outside these doors, curated by Bruce McLean. My country I still call Australia home, contemporary art from Black Australia, here at the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. And we should say that My Country is the gallery's largest exhibition to date of contemporary Indigenous Australian art, and it's drawn largely from the gallery's own collection. And of course it occupies those three big ground floor exhibition spaces. It's an unprecedented exhibition of over 300 works by 116 artists from every state and territory. Tonight, we're here obviously to have this GOMA talk, and my special guests and I will explore the first of the themes that come up in the exhibition outside, and that is the theme of country. GOMA Talks is interactive. You can take part in the discussion here in the live audience, all of you, or if you're watching via the live stream by tweeting your comments and questions to the hashtag GOMA Talks, or use the SMS at 04888 Talks, 04888 Talks. We really want to hear what you have to say and the questions for our distinguished panel. And some of the ideas that I just want to throw out there before I introduce the panel. Broadly, the theme is writing as a medium for expressing ideas about country. That might include identifying with a particular place, belonging to a particular place, or being displaced or indeed removed from that place. And I think all the panel here will bring their own perspectives to this very broad, but I think very compelling topic. Introductions. Melissa Lukashenko is a Murri woman of European and Yugambeh Bundjalung descent. She's an acclaimed, recently award-winning novelist and essayist. And of course her writing, you'll know, it explores the stories of ordinary Australians with particular reference to Aboriginal people and those living on the margins of the First World. Melissa's received numerous nominations and awards: the Dobby for Steam Pigs, the Aurora for Killing Darcy. She was a finalist in 2001 of the Courier Mail Book of the Year Awards, the New South Wales Premier's Award, and that was for Hard Yards. Mullumbimby is, of course, the winner of the Best Fiction Book at the Queensland Literary Awards. Can you please welcome Melissa Lukashenko? And down here is Rory O'Connor. Rory is a descendant of Jackie, who was the king of the Logan and Pimpamar. He's the director of the Yugambeh Museum, which I'm going to visit tomorrow, in Beenleigh, which was established to record and promote the language, history and culture of the Aboriginal people of the Yugambeh language region, our Gold Coast region. In 2013, this year, the Yugambeh Museum launched Queensland's first Aboriginal language app, first Aboriginal language app ever, which features 1,000 language words. I've got it on my phone. It's incredible. It's part of the museum's Right Into Art project, which was highly commended in the 2013 Queensland Reconciliation Awards. Rory's the founder of the annual 3-day walking pilgrimage, the Drumley Walk, which follows the past journeys of community elders from Bow Desert to Southport. Can you please welcome Rory? Nicholas Rothwell is an award-winning writer, journalist, and of course he's the Northern Australian correspondent for the Australian newspaper. In his books, Nicholas uses a combination of fiction and non-fiction to explore the North. In 2006, he won a Walkley Award for his coverage of Indigenous affairs. His books include Heaven and Earth, Wings of the Kitehawk, Another Country, The Red Highway, Journeys to the Interior, and his latest, Bellamore, was published in January. Please welcome Nicholas. And finally, Sue Abbey is the former project director and now advisor to the Black and White project. It's a national editors and writers project developed to foster a significant Indigenous writing community. Sue's vice chair of the Queensland Writers Centre and a publications advisor to the Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Publishing in Canberra, and a former member of the Brisbane Writers Festival Management Committee. She's managed UQP's Black Australian Writing Series since its beginning in 1990, and I think still also coordinates the David Yunaipan Award. As senior editor and publisher of the Australian Black Writing List, Sue's worked with emerging and established authors across every genre. Sue's the co-editor of Fresh Cuttings, UQP's first black writing anthology, I believe. Welcome, Sue. Now, as I said, the exhibition outside My Country I Still Call Australia Home tells us that artists are painting country, and they're doing it in diverse and unexpected ways, through history, through personal experience, through memory, through seeing. We know that. But we're also writing about country, and it's not just an aesthetic discourse. It's not a language that is confined to the visual. There's a rich theme of writing about country, the poetics of country. It's also a vibrant political idea too. And it's appropriate that I begin by asking each of our panel, just on this question of country. This word country, we use it often, Melissa. But what does it mean to you?
I think country is a relationship or a set of relationships at its heart. People often, outsiders, think country refers to earth, or if there's a slightly more sophisticated understanding, earth, trees, maybe the waters, animals. But it's not. It's the set of relationships that bind humans and other sentient beings together in a particular place, in a particular legal, cultural and spiritual framework, I would say. Everything in Aboriginal tradition comes back to relationships eventually, and country is the primary amongst them.
Nicholas, your perspective on that term country?
Would be somewhat different from Melissa's. I'm much more of a wanderer, and the great sense of selflessness and happiness which has been brought to me by travelling through the Australian landscape, through the landscape of this continent, all of it, is not a possessive one. It's not one which makes me feel especially tied or rooted to a special area. So having said that, I must say I feel more at ease in the Australian landscape in a funny way than in most other parts of the earth. The other parts of the planet that I can claim some sort of affiliation with, Manhattan, where I was born, Central Europe, where I was brought up and part of my background lies. These are places with their own shadows, and there are plenty of shadows over the Australian landmass, but somehow it seems to be a domain that can welcome you in. And I found it to be a very forgiving sort of place to spend time in.
Sue?
I see this is our own perspective, which is
Absolutely.
an interesting angle, and I hadn't looked at it this way, so it throws my initial response to it.
What does that mean to you? Country?
Well, to me, as you can tell by the accent, I'm not Australian, but like Nicholas, I am a traveller at heart, and home is where I am most comfortable, and half my life has been spent in Australia, although my educational formative years were spent in Texas, which is my homeland. But I've also lived abroad. I was in the Peace Corps in North Africa, and I'm I learned many lessons there about the dominant culture and the very promise that I made to myself of never thinking that I could cross over and become Moroccan or become Yanua or become anything except stay within myself and to be an observer. And so that, as an editor, is with my background has been quite helpful. I realize the accident that can happen when you feel that you have been or put yourself in another culture's sphere and consider yourself of that culture. So I definitely do live as an outsider.
Rory, your sense of country is very much enfolded in the place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I'm guessing.
Can I just start by saying Minyugu, Balgul Yuan Yuan, Anya Jimbalang Wallo, which is just to say hello, good early evening to my many friends, and it's great to see so many people here. We can't see you all, but my dear mother's here. I want to say hi to her in the audience here, so hi Mum. What was the question? No, Aboriginal people often ask each other in conversation, so where are you from, or where's your country? And what they're saying is not what's your postcode, where you live now, you know, do you live in Mount Gravatt or Sydney, or what they're saying is where do you identify with? Where is your country? And we have a large map at our museum, the Tyndale map actually, and we often bring people in and the Aboriginal people will go up and they'll point to where their country is. And oftentimes they have never been there, but they still call that their country. And it's very common also for people who claim, they'll say, oh, I'm a Torres Strait Islander. And when I talk to them, though, I know not to ask the question if you've ever been to the Torres Strait, because a lot of them haven't. They've grown up in Cairns, but they identify so strongly with the Torres Strait. I had a young girl in the other day, and she said, no, but I'm going to go there next year. And I thought, she's 21. What an amazing feeling that will be for her to finally go to her country. And so I think country is such an important marker in Aboriginal conversations. And I've asked the same question to the non-Aboriginal people who come in. They get a bit awkward because they go, well, I don't know what you mean. And Mum was born in Maitland and I think Dad was in Newcastle and I've lived here all my life, and there's a confusion. But saying that, I'm incredibly lucky in that I can actually, I moved from living in Brisbane because I worked in media and that's where the work was. And I've moved and I now live on my traditional country. And that was a conscious move to uproot my family and my two little people so they could walk out in the morning and see, I see, that's a billin, that's a king parrot, you know, and they can see a kookaroo, a kookaburra. And so for me, it's a place where if you're lucky enough to be there and be deeply rooted in it, it's a blessing as an Aboriginal person.
Now, of course, Melissa's novel Mullumbimby has won the, as I said, Best Fiction Prize at the Queensland Literary Awards. And Melissa, this book is embedded with country, it's embedded with language, our common Bundjalung language, Yugambeh language, which is part of the same chain. The way you describe that hinterland of the far north coast of New South Wales, there's so much love and nostalgia in the way that you describe that place. Is there also, I mean, I understand most of the novel was written off country.
It was started probably in Kingscliff, Suffolk Park, but the bulk of it was written in Brisbane. Yeah.
And that sense of nostalgia is written into the story, I think.
Well, I suppose it's a cliche to say that great love must entail great pain, and
it's partly true, isn't it?
I think so. And you know, the thing about truisms is that they are true. And for any Aboriginal person that's aware of their traditions and aware of what connection to country can actually be, to lose that is to lose a significant part of yourself. You know, and I don't think any Aboriginal people don't experience a change in identity when they're off country, which is why I thought it was very interesting, Nicholas, that you used the word selflessness and you paired that with happiness to talk about travelling the Australian landscape. And I'd like to come back to that if we could. I'm also noticing a Twitter feed, someone asking why only sentient beings are part of country, and this person has asked why not rocks, for example. And my response to that is that within Aboriginal cosmology, rocks are very much sentient beings. Yeah.
Can you do us the very great honour of reading from
Sure.
Mullumbimby?
Sure. I'll read from the beginning of chapter 2, where my main character Jo, who's a Bundjalung woman who has grown up partly on her country, she does know her culture, but she has brought back some of the ancestral country, and she's reflecting upon that for the first time in the book. The sun was creeping above the slash pines, and its early slanting rays bathed the 20 acres with a brilliant golden sheen. To her left, Bottlebrush Hill gazed benignly down over the old farmhouse and paddocks. To her right, the heavily forested ridgeline made a thick green barrier between her and the rest of the world. Few trees stood out distinctly, but in one thinly wooded section, Jo saw a large eucalypt, a mountain ash, perhaps, raised its curiously heart-shaped canopy in outline against the lightening sky. She slowly breathed out a stream of cold white breath and contemplated an astonishing fact. From where she stood in the middle of the big paddock, she could take off running in any direction and be winded before she'd left her own land. That was something for a Goori woman to think about, something to hold on to and savour. The bottom dam was hazy with mist. White wisps lingered among the dark, knotty pines beside it. The morning felt miraculous, as though this was the first day after some tremendous upheaval. It seemed to Jo, facing the dawn, that anything might be possible now, and as if the day, this morning, this sun upon these hills, called for a kind of reverence that she could barely express. She kicked off her dirty runners and let her bare feet meet the earth. The grass she stood on was moist with autumn dew. The cold of night still lingered in the soil beneath, especially here in the shadow of the enormous tallowood tree. Jo stepped out into open pasture where the sun could fall directly on her, and as its warmth reached her face and chest, she lifted her arms high in supplication. Black old sun. Oh, I must have done something right someday, somewhere, to be still standing up alive here on Bundjalung land. She turned in a slow circle, arms high, watching the ridgeline. Here I am, my Budjari Jug, and here I am, Aguri Jalgani, Jinangalela here. Poor and ignorant though I might be, I'm here at last.
Thank you. The language words in this, the great thing about the novel is that it's peppered with Bundjalung language. But you've also been, on your own journey to discover the language, to learn the language.
I have, and in the audience here tonight is Pat O'Connor, who together with Auntie Yazola, Rory's auntie, Yazola, 30 years ago or more, had the vision in Joe Bioka-Peterson's Queensland, mind you.
He helped, actually.
He helped.
He was part of the reason they had to do something.
A driving force.
Yeah.
But an era when Special Branch was still surveilling Aboriginal people on a routine basis, Pat and Yazola had the vision that Yugambeh people would speak Yugambeh language on country once again, and set in place language workshops and began constructing dictionaries, with the result that today, even though I've mashed up Bundjalung with Yugambeh in the book because that's what's in my brain, the result is that we are reclaiming language, and we're speaking to the country in different terms, in different words.
Nicholas, I want you to read. I think that what Melissa's talking about actually does intercut quite nicely with the reading that you've chosen for tonight, and about the limits of language.
It
limits of the
intercuts
English
very
language.
nicely indeed, because it's
Limits of the
a
English
master
language.
segue at work. And
Oh, really?
I should just say a few words that the idea that I'm trying to track down is that the English language which arrived in Australia is not a language which grew out of the soil. It does not have the same organic relationship to the landscape as the languages that were furnace out and grew from country. And this has important implications, I think, for the way that we speak, think, write, relate. And I'm looking, if you like, at the other side of the mirror that you were just describing, the mirror of reclamation and of desire for connection. And I read this to Daniel a little moment ago, and we hatched out this thought that the two perspectives might intermarry. So I'll begin, and we'll see how we go for time. The ideas and concepts that shaped Australia came from elsewhere. The words we use now to describe it too. Our language is an import. It did not develop here organically. The English that we speak came with Arthur Phillip and his band of men and women. It is maladapted to the continent and to the inland, though it is the universal language of our time. And it is simple and full of utility, and like every vernacular, it is in a state of rapid evolution. It is constantly being exchanged and remade on the waves of speech. But there is still a subtle gap between the words of our tongue and the language in the country around us. The phenomena of nature, the sights and the sounds in the air, the animals and the wildlife. And for these cogent reasons, scientific words and loan words from Aboriginal languages have flooded into our vocabulary and become part of our day-to-day conceptual equipment. How clear this becomes if we make a brief foray beyond our confected and well-controlled urban surrounds and penetrate into the interior, to the Flinders Ranges, for instance, close at hand, and set off on a little journey, an exploration of our own. But wait, it's plain at once they aren't really ranges in the true sense of the word, so much as light crustal folds. They are gentle, not steep. They are discreet and unemphatic, not high and conventionally sublime. And why are they named for Flinders, a surveyor with no connection to that country? There are creeks there, but no water flows in them. They are flash flood channels, nothing more. There are gum trees lining them, but they are not trees that share the look or the life cycle of a European tree in the forest landscape of our language's distant past, where the associations of its words were laid down and the nets of their meanings were tied together. In that world, in those times, trees gave shade and they bore fruit in season. They dropped their leaves in winter. A gum tree of the inland lives for fire. It seeds through fire. The shade its leaves cast is a memory of what shade might be rather than the real thing. Its trunk is a repository for ants and termites. Its roots are shallow. The soil they stand in is not the deep topsoil of a European field, but a red iron oxide stained substrate. There are lakes on the horizon. They gleam and glint, but they are salt, and the water that they seem to hold is nothing but a mirage. The mismatch is slight but palpable. The divide, the structuring gap between the deep buried associations in the words we use and what we see before us and apply those words to is more than just a minor inconvenience in the language we've inherited. A difficulty we can steer past. It breeds something. It creates something, a space for the free play of the imagination, a mood as well, a tonality, well masked, a faint sense of being adrift, which many writers in the Australian landscape manifest almost at a subterranean level of their thought. And this sets up a tension, for the very fabric of the language seems to look elsewhere, to scan some horizon. Hence, a yearning, a nostalgia for a world that is not present and cannot be present. Loss and longing are coded in, and with them comes an urgent quest for plenitude, for connection, a heightened focus, a skew in the world. And often I feel I can hear this primordial whisper in the Australian memoirists and poets of the past century, whose work means the most to me. Shall I go on further?
Would you like to hear some more from Nicholas? A little bit more, if you don't mind. There's not much more in that.
No, that's right. I also suspect that this condition has multiple consequences today. It is always quietly announcing itself. It keeps open a certain self-consciousness in the culture. It has sparked an appetite for strongly place-based writing and a counter-impulse, a fierce receptivity to foreign literature. And it has helped create in recent times an enthusiasm for indigenous art and story. Aboriginal words and narratives are words and narratives bound into the land. If this inclination in the language affects those born into it in subtle ways, the disconnect has always been of a different and more immediate order for incomers travelling to Australia, moving through it, studying, and taking in its newness, sinking themselves in its strange atmospherics. What they would encounter was a world that failed to fit, a challenge.
Thank you, Nicholas. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
There's a lot there, Nicholas. But we still have to try to use the language. The language is at our disposal. Aboriginal writers will be using the English language to express those ideas. How do we get past these gaps, this subtle gap, or the limits of the language? I mean, you do it with your writing.
It's a dizzying thought, and I think it's well to reflect for a moment when we're considering the Renaissance in Aboriginal art and in language and in cultural assertion, this revival project which is being engaged in widely, just what the revival is dealing with and through. And this is a very painful thought which I think we should bring out into the open, is much the same situation, is, to use a slightly captious parallel, that of Jewish people in Germany using the language of their doom, and yet it is the language which their culture is bound up in. It's not a very precise parallel. I wouldn't want to push it too far, but one must be aware of the chasms that await us. This isn't just a question of the choice of vocabulary for talking about a parakeet or something. It's about the deep bind between the brain and the heart of an individual and a group of people who feel linked into place and yet are striving to hear that place's heartbeat, do you know? And this, I think, is it's a matter that lies before us all. We watch in the mainstream world what the Aboriginal realm does, and the Aboriginal realm does what it does, both for itself and to and for us. And this is what I think is so remarkable about your recent book, Melissa, because I read it and I feel it is an including book, a book which I can read much more than a great deal of other literature of your time, and not feel pushed back by it. And this may well be, as you were saying earlier, because of some sort of element of biculturality in the stance that you take up. But we could spiral out a long way further. But country has a lot to say to us, and we have to hear in a tongue and seek to answer it, whether that tongue be from it or not.
See, Nicholas, I don't disagree with anything you're saying there, but I guess I would take it further and say that any language is but a very rough approximation of, certainly of Aboriginal reality, of the world. If we're talking about country is best understood through the feet, through the nostrils, through the eyes, and particularly through the ears, and through the taste buds, and that is that's the true interpretation of country. Aboriginal language gets a lot closer to interpreting country than modern English does, but it too is only one step removed. You know, if modern English is 2 steps removed, Yugambeh, Bunjalung, Pitjantjatjara, Yunkatjara, all these languages are still removed, and I think anyone who's had any involvement with ceremony will understand that language is both vital and inadequate at the same time.
Can I ask, we've got a question a comment about the language experience being very much something that we have here. Absolutely we do. And there's a very large mural work in the corridor, the Great Hall, as it were, of GOMA by Megan Cope, which makes this very same point about the continuing existence of language in country, embedded in country in the Moreton Bay area. But Rory, can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between language, which is something that you are so actively engaged in, and country?
Daniel can also explain, I'm not texting my friends, I'm tweeting for people who don't think, gosh, he's rude. Because some lovely other
Because they're coming thick and fast.
There's some love, and I love Nicholas's voice as one of them. I love that one. Hard to compete with.
Oh, what about me?
We have a word in our language, butai butai, and it means happy families. But more specifically, it refers to the feeling you get when you stand around a tree that's full of birds. And I love that word for happy families because, and I mentioned before, I moved to Mount Tamborine where I can live on country, and I come out in the mornings and I think of this word and I think, how lucky am I to have my happy family here, and I hear these rainbow lorikeets going crazy, and then the billisms, the king parrots come down and they have their go. And I think that's a word that Nicholas said, you know, the English language wasn't developed on Mount Tamborine. It was developed in a place where that concept maybe wasn't as strong. And so we're lucky to have words in language that relate specifically to country and land. And I like to champion those because that's the way you make it relevant to our Jarjums, our young kids coming through who, whether they're Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, if Mount Tamborine's at home, they need to know that word. Duggalumba, the word for Logan River. How many hundreds of thousands of people drive over there every day and don't know that Duggalumba is a hornet, the home of the hornet, and what the significance of that is, and why a hornet is so important. Because if you didn't have hornets, there's lots of tree species that just wouldn't be there. So, and Chembrin. Chembrin is the word for the finger lime, which is fairly unique to Beechmont and Mount Tamborine and down northern New South Wales. Chembrin, and it is Mount Chembrin, by the way. Chembrin was the
You're talking about Mount Tamborine. People would know it as Mount Tamborine.
Mount Tamborine, sorry, yes, Mount Tamborine. Chembrin, or Mount Chembrin, he was a huge prince, and he's there today, and we walk on him. And I've invited... Melissa tells the beautiful love story of Chembrin at our event, standing on top of Chembrin's shoulders on Mount Chembrin, looking out over the western flatlands. And Chembrin also means a yam in a hill. And it's a particular yam that's only found on Mount Chembrin or on Tamborine, because the yams down at the desert, well, they're big and lumpy. But the ones up there are these funny, finicky things like your fingers that are hard to dig out. So for me, you know, language is the land and the land is the language, and they're linked together, and we're lucky to have that. And I think that's the beauty of really having those words and then pulling them apart and seeing how relevant they are to the very landscape that you're living in now.
Sue, in all your time in publishing black writing, in developing black writing, you would have seen this idea of country emerge.
I've certainly seen it tonight when Melissa was reading and that extract, and what the value of Melissa's work, what she is actually doing for readers now, are taking them into a world that is a rendering which is her own, yet in fiction. So we have the scene with Joe, and Joe is doing what is an age-old process of the oral story. the character who's telling the story is within the frame. Unlike non-Indigenous, especially through academic work, outside and assessing from outside. Here we have Jo who's inside, and so she names on the right what she sees on the right. She names what she sees on the left. So you have an idea of squarely where you are in the story as it's being told to you. And then the ash, the mountain ash, that tree, which will probably be significant then through the rest of the story that she points out. And then the beautiful language then, that as you were saying, Daniel, just peppers the book. And without explanation, it's just within the context that she's given. And this is the beauty of the writing that would have taken a long time to actually render for you, I imagine. It would have taken a lot of work, how to bring this down, this story, because it's one that is also about Melissa's own journey, her understanding of the language, and coming to that. And the other part that I like that I can see in the classes that I took in the Yanyuwa language, of course, I wouldn't be able to speak a stick of it, so I admire greatly that you
that's
and
the
Rory,
language spoken in the Gulf region of the
that's
Northern
right, up
Territory.
near Baralula, up Nicholas's Way. But that distinctive article, that tree, that man, that place, not just any place. So it becomes very specific and then ties you into the very earth that's there. And land is also about well-being as well as identity. And so you see that with the character and her own well-being, how she's coming out of herself. And yeah, it's just so beautiful. I'm so...
Thank you.
I'm so proud of you for bringing that
Sorry,
down.
Daniel,
Yeah.
while we're saying nice things about Melissa, I want to...
I can't tell you that.
No, but and I know...
You can dig it up.
It was so lovely to see language being put into a book just as a community member, so I want to thank you publicly. To do that helps champion our language. And so thank you, Melissa, for doing that, because it's a wonderful thing for kids to see it in there and go, hey, we can do this too. So
Thanks, Rory.
Thank you very much.
Auntie Linda McBride, you spoke really movingly in a panel today at Brisbane Writers' Festival, and was basically saying that she was in tears reading Bundjalung language for the first time in a novel that she held in her hands, and that was...
Movies next.
Yeah. I've always said this novel needs to be made into a movie. I think it's a great Australian story. But in the writing of Mullumbimby, it's not just about the use of language. It's about sensibility. It's about a sense of place. It's about belonging. Those words that we often hear. The sensibility, though, is there's a lot of, just that earthy humour, that salty black humour, and larrikinism. And I think we've spoken about this before, and I always thought, well, there's the larrikin and the blackfella. Is there something? Are they the same? Can they be the same thing? Larrikinism, though, it has a particular meaning in the context of Mullumbimby.
Yeah, well, I often reflect on... there's a quote in one of Henry Reynolds' books where he's quoting someone from North Queensland, an early white colonist, and the white colonist is tearing his hair out on the page, saying we can't get these Aboriginal people to understand that one person's better than another. It's the effort, the agony of trying to impose a hierarchical society upon Aboriginal cultures in Cape York, and really larrikinism is simply the voice of people that don't accept that idea, that don't accept that some human beings are better than other human beings because of their station in life, because of where they were born or whether they've got money in their pocket. And so you find that larrikin element in most societies, but it chimes very well with Aboriginal Australia, I'd have to say, and it even sounds like an Aboriginal word. We've discussed this, Daniel, Larrigan, yes. I don't know where my people are from, but I think we're the Larrigan tribe.
I'll have to fill you in. I think someone did actually email in after we had our conversation.
Oh, quite indignant, I think they were, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the limits of language is such an interesting way to think about writing and these kind of sometimes incommunicable concepts, which seem to be incommunicable. We've got another question on Twitter here. Rory, do you think technology has the capacity to save or preserve Indigenous languages? Are they being retaught or discovered in communities? Well, yes, they are, if the Yugambeh language app is any indication.
And there is a tweet that says, Daniel's voice is like honey. There you go, hey?
Sympathy vote.
Take it. The short answer is, does technology have the capacity to save or preserve? Not by itself. People save and preserve languages, and you people. What did we say? The word is kailgum, and it means the champion in the fight. And I often say to people, and teachers particularly, but kailgum, you are the champions in this fight, because it is a fight to stop these wonderful languages disappearing on our watch. But technology, the classic thing is, this was a dictionary written 100 years ago by an Aboriginal man from our country. I'm very lucky that he did it. He was in a fortunate position to do it. He'd survived the frontier wars as a young boy. But he sat down with an English teacher and he wrote this in 1913. And so 100 years later, and I carry it all the time, and people ring up and say, quick, what's the word for a koala? I'm about to meet the Governor-General and I'm going to throw it into my speech. I'm going to impress him. And I say, look, I gave you the book, and they say my staff stole it. So I get sick of that. So I thought I'll put this into an app so they can carry it with them wherever they go. But my problem was an app itself won't make people use language, won't empower kids to, won't empower teachers to get into it. So a lovely lady, Robin Dorr from Logan City Council, came into my museum and said, you need a haiku poetry competition. And I said, great, what's haiku? And haiku is, 17 syllables makes up a poem. And we piloted that little thing, and what it did is empowered people to pick that up and play with it, and play with words, because we were saying, as a culture and as a community, this is our language, it's yours, take it with you, it's free, put it on your phone, and give it to your kids and use it around the place. So technology is, and if you go to our website, we are uploading language lists that are public access. So kids in Logan, there's 20 different language groups in Logan. Kids there, if they want to use language and call the teacher names or whatever, people wouldn't do that, but they can download Waka Waka, they can download Gungari, they can download all sorts of languages, so they feel empowered to play with that language. So technology is a hugely important part, and every young person has one of these. It mightn't have any credit in it, but they've all got one of these.
There's a potential.
There's no excuse for it.
It's happening in an urban context, which is the other thing that's important to point out, as one of the texts that's come through says, the language exists in varying degrees of health and varying degrees of use across the country, and the idea that language is only thriving in the remote areas isn't actually true.
And just going on the tour with Bruce McLean, the curator of the exhibition this afternoon, he made the point. He asked the question of the group. He said, "So who here speaks an Aboriginal language?" Blank faces. Even I'm just like, he said, "You all do." It's the place names of many of the suburbs of Brisbane. And I think, down in northern New South Wales, in parts of the Gold Coast, those language names survive. People may have the wrong word for them. I think there's a very funny story about the naming of Goodna. Melissa.
I don't know the story, but I know what Goodna means.
Well, the story is, I believe, when asked to name this place, what is this place? Our black fella said, Guna. Guna means, as you know, feces, or gunang.
That's a good story.
Well, this is what I'm told. So whether he was having a joke at the white fella's expense, we'll never know. And if Guna actually does not mean Guna, I apologise.
I think so.
This is the story that I'm told, and we call it Guna. But speaking those language names is I think is really important, and we need to be conscious of what those language words are, and that they do exist in our built environment. We had a tweet before about language in the urban context, and kids are feeling empowered to speak the language through things like the Yugambeh language app. So, just going through the list of books that have been published or that have come across the desk of the Black and White project, now managed by Linda McBride and Ellen Van Neerven. Some of those books, I mean, I was blown away by. I am blown away constantly. A lot of writing crosses my desk as a producer of an Aboriginal art and culture program. But the rise of Ali Cobby Eckermann, she's won the New South Wales Premier's Literary for Ruby Moonlight, her verse novel, extraordinary piece of writing. Tristan Savage, Jared Thomas, Grace McPherson. It's not stopping. There's a wave of writing.
That's right. Well, the hope is that the capacity is building, and so with the Black and White project and with writing prizes such as New South Wales Writers Centre has just set one up, and there's of course the David Unipen Award, which I'm the Black and White Award, but Melissa was one of the judges on the David Unipen Award, and then there's the Black and White Award. So these awards now are helping to attract emerging writers, as well as get behind writers who are into their second or third book. And this is, I was thinking what's important about this is to talk too about the exhibit that's on here at GOMA and the idea of urban Aboriginal lives and language and experience. And it's often something that there's a division, especially with readers, that readers will make. I know that there was an attempt to sell an author who's very close in this room here tonight, one of her books a while back, yours, Melissa, to a Scottish publisher who said, why would I want to publish another book about urban angst? And thinking, well, it's a bit different. We're talking about Aboriginal Australia here, but the point was completely missed. So I think that hesitation to give over to the urban Aboriginal experience.
Urban angst in Mullumbimby.
It was a previous book some years ago, not in Mullumbimby Steam Pigs, actually. Yeah.
I think it was Hard Yards.
Hard Yards, in an attempt to get the rights, some international rights going on that. So I just found that a bit of a surprise to think that there wasn't a distinction made with Aboriginal lives and angst, and the Scottish publisher saying, I get this all the time, not making,
because
not having any
Aboriginal
value.
in the international imagination means, the passage I read before it speaks to a truth of Aboriginal experience of home and country, but it also speaks to international and Australian cliche about what it is to have a Indigenous relationship to land. That same relationship exists in a different way in Hard Yards, but it's not, I haven't joined the dots for people, and therefore it's not as clear.
Melissa, you talked about, this morning you talked about the meme of your character Jo Breen, who is described by some critics as being lost, and she needs to be reconnected to her country.
It was a very small minority of reviewers. Most reviewers did understand that she has language, she's grown up partly on that country, that she knows she's Aboriginal and she understands that Aboriginal world. But still, the minority of reviewers and critics have lazily decided that she is torn between two cultures, or is a person struggling to to reclaim something which is lost. And there's a key passage in the book, actually early on the beach, where Joe and the love interest Two-Boy are looking at the night sky, and they're discussing the emu, the neuron in the night sky. And I took the risk in that passage of having Two-Boy refer to what has been lost, to refer to the old people and how much they knew, and how he feels like the words he uses, I think, are he's been learning the culture for 30 years and he was brought up in the culture, but he still feels like he knows fuck all sometimes. And Joe agrees with him. And I really went back and forth on including that because it is such a strong meme of Australian life that Aboriginal people are dispossessed of everything. But I wanted to be honest at the same time, say, yeah, lots has been lost, and yet this is what remains. And, most reviewers understood that, a few haven't.
Yeah. I don't feel lost. Do you feel lost?
Not
Rory, do you feel
currently.
lost?
If you do, there's good news because we talked about Jackie, King of the Logan and Pimpama. He died in 1901. But in one of the readings I went through recently, he was lamenting that, oh, yes, I write songs and I'm okay at it, but, the real people who write songs, well, that would be my father and my grandfather. And we've lost that now.
Yeah.
And, I just think you've never lost it. It's always your job to gather whatever you've got and go forward with it.
And in fact, you talked about the responsibility, about not feeling, because we come from this part of the world, that we don't have the right to call ourselves Aboriginal, and in fact that we have a serious responsibility here.
And there's a favourite auntie of mine, and I call her a cranky auntie, and if Auntie M's in the
We've
room...
all got one.
And she is, but she's an advocate, I'd call it. But I said to her once, and she was a very passionate Aboriginal lady, and I said, look, I grew up at Roachdale, I got fair skin, do I call myself Aboriginal or Aboriginal descent, or what's the go, And she looked at me and she said, so they tried to take me from my family, Rory, and they tried to kill out our language. And you've also been privy to all the stories of the community because you're a journalist. And you're going to let that die when I die, so there'll be no more Aborigines? Is that what you're going to do on your watch? And I thought about that. And I think about that every day. And we all come from many cultures, but if you're of Aboriginal descent as well, you carry with you a bit of that responsibility, because if you don't do something to pass the stories on that were probably passed to you, in your kitchen or whatever, however it was passed to you, you're letting a culture die on your watch. My mother grew up in the household of a lady who was traditionally scarred. She was born in the 1860s. That was Granny Graham. And, our link to that generation is tenuous and fading, and we have to do everything we can with a sense of urgency to make sure what we've got is preserved and carried on. We've got
Only 4 minutes left of this conversation, unfortunately. So, Nicholas, a last question to you. It's from via SMS. How do you share your experiences of place with a wide readership and for different contexts? But can you answer it as briefly as possible, because we need to get through everyone over here. I mean, you do that in your writing.
I have some faith that language can capture an essence or a mood or a feeling, but one of the things I come to feel increasingly, and I suspect in my secret heart it may well be because of the pressure of influence from remote Aboriginal Australia on me, I have increasingly a sense that the rhythm of the words that you write and the words that you speak, the rhythm, the tonality, the music is answering something like a rhythm in the landscape. That's my sort of one sentence. Zip.
Beautifully done. Melissa, anything that you'd like to leave our audience with?
An early tweet said, and I'm just looking for it here, could Rory or Melissa please speak about the relationship between language and country? And language is part of country, because country is about relationships, and language is one of the ways we express that. It's an imperfect way, but it's the best we've got. And if we learn to listen as well as to speak language, then we'll all do a lot better.
Sue, do you feel there's growing support and funding for and funding to publish Indigenous authors? And what about young and emerging writing? I think that's happening.
I certainly do. I think that there's a groundswell. I think there was a quiet period after Ujaru's work and Jack Davis's, and that we're seeing an upswing. And I'd like to really quickly say about urgency. Yes, there is an urgency to get down language as quickly as possible, and things like Rory's app, which he's willing to share with others, I think is the answer, and not just to stop and psychoanalyze and analyze to the umpteenth, but to get it done, yeah.
And Rory, just finally to you, you talk about language and writing things down, but also there are practical things, the enacting writing, enacting Aboriginal, enacting Aboriginality.
You have to, the Cornish language was considered dead in the year 1900. 1904, some smarty pants wrote a book called A Handbook to the Cornish Language, and now there's thousands of speakers. And part of that journey of getting a language like ours, which was, Mum was told it was lost, forget it, go study another language. We walk, we talk, you move through the landscape and you try and use those words. And I think books are a lovely way. The next step is movies. It's getting that as part of the current narrative, which is, and someone said here, what about sculpture and painting and song and dance? All right, let's get language into those, because that's what we call culture as a wider society.
Beautiful way to finish. Can you please thank our panel? And we would like to thank you for joining us here tonight for this first session of GOMA Talks, My Country, and for taking part in the discussion via Twitter and SMS. A reminder that tonight's GOMA Talks discussion is one of 3 events, this is just the first, being co-presented by ABC Radio National and the Queensland Art Gallery and the Gallery of Modern Art during the My Country exhibition. And I encourage you to come back or tune in to the next discussion on Thursday, the 19th of September, with my colleague Anthony Fennell from RN's Future Tense program. And they'll be exploring contemporary politics and culture related to the theme of life in the exhibition outside. And for those of you in Brisbane, over the next few days, Melissa Lukashenko and Nicholas Rothwell are also taking part in the Brisbane Writers' Festival and events of the Brisbane Writers' Festival taking place at the State Library. Please, if I need to encourage you, do go and see them. And tonight's GOMA Talks will be available to watch again online at Quag GOMA TV, through the gallery's website. I'm Daniel Browning, I'm from Radio National. Thank you and good night.